Hi, LA Progressive friends and family. This is Sharon Kyle here with my life partner and co-founder of the LA Progressive, Dick Price. And we are so delighted to be joined by Barry Craig, who is a regular contributor to the LA Progressive. Barry, this piece that we're going to be talking about right now that you wrote, man, you just hit it out of the park. I'm telling you, I marvel. I really do. I marvel. First of all, you're really great at knowing how to getting words down on a sheet of paper. But it's not just that. It's the depth of your wisdom, your lived experience, your research. And I was telling Dick, how can we get more white men to see what you see?
I wish I knew.
Yeah.
Yeah, as we were reading it again to prepare for this interview, I said, Sharon, did you write this?
So Barry, why don't you tell the LA Progressive audience a little bit about your background? You know, you didn't come out of the womb knowing all of this stuff. So give us your educational background, what you did for a living. How did this shape you? Because you're a white man that lives in the South,
Right.
and you lived through a good portion of the period of the Jim Crow South.
I did. I did. Um, by way of background, I'm 76 years old, lived in Western Kentucky all of my life. Went to public school here, went to a public university, Murray State University. And I think that's where it began for me. I was a history major, political science minor. And the more I studied history, the more I began to realize some things. Now, a personal experience I will share with you. I grew up in the Presbyterian Church in Mayfield, Kentucky, my hometown. And I don't know if I've told you this story before, but it's worth repeating. When I was in the seventh or eighth grade, the schools were desegregated. Integrated is not correct, desegregated, because what happened was is that the black students came over to Mayfield High School from Dunbar High School, but it wasn't a one for one. The black teachers came over. That's not how it worked. They took some, but not all. And so I met this young man named Cecil Horton, seventh or eighth grade, I can't remember. And when you're a kid and you meet another kid, one of the first things you ask is, "What does your father do for a living?" He said, "My father's a Presbyterian minister." And I said, "Where?" He said, "Right here in Mayfield." They hit me like a ton of bricks. I never forgot it. Uh, all this stuff I heard in Sunday school class about we're all God's children, God loves us all the same. There was obviously a group of Presbyterians in my hometown that were not welcome in my church. The only black faces I ever saw in my church was a woman, an elderly woman who kept the kids in the nursery, and the janitor. Uh, that really profoundly shook me. Uh, in the hall of the Sunday school building was a picture of Jesus, who I called the Belgian Jesus. He had brown hair and green eyes, looked like a Belgian, or. And I mean, I never forgot. I never forgot that experience, and I carried it with me. So then, when I began to study history, I'm an Americanist. I did study some European history, but I'm an Americanist, and it began to be very plain all along where this all got started. And the piece that I wrote, I really enjoyed. Of course, I've studied W.B. Du Bois before, uh, and he was perplexed as he's a sociologist, as you know, social scientist. He was perplexed after during the post-Civil War period, Reconstruction and beyond, as to why poor whites sided with the white power structure. It just didn't make sense. Poverty is poverty. Or as a civil rights activist in Paducah, Kentucky, where I taught and was a newspaper reporter for years, said it's not black and white, it's green, it's economics.
Yeah.
And you go back and they play the race card. It has worked forever and it's still working. And I remember when Trump was elected in 16, there was this media narrative that it was disaffected. These white working class folks were upset because of their economic situation. I didn't believe that. And so I waited, and after this first wave of these newspaper and TV reports, the social scientists got to studying this, and that wasn't correct. It was race, just like it's always been. And then I read a piece in the Guardian, the British paper, which I love the paper, and one of their writers, her name is Sida Grundy, came up with it, and she points the whole thing out, and you can trace it all through history like that. Uh, in slavery times, the white powers that be told whites that no matter how poor you are, no matter how down you are on the socioeconomic ladder, you're always better than a black person, free or slave. So they always sided with the enslavers, whereas they were just dirt poor. Now, some of these Confederate apologists, sad to say, several live in Kentucky, although we were a Union state, not a Confederate state. Uh, they said, well, it couldn't have been about slavery because most of these Southern soldiers didn't have slaves. That's true. But the reason they didn't was because they were too poor to own slaves. They longed to be rich slave owners. Uh, and again, and I've done quite a bit of research in newspapers of the period, and it's always the race card. No matter how poor you are, you're better than quote unquote them. Uh, the whole thing, it's just so blatant how they did this. And it persists after the Civil War when you have lots and lots of poor white sharecroppers, just dirt farmers. And it's the same thing. Now, one of the most fascinating periods in American history to me is the 1890s. Farmers across the country, and they're in Dix Homestead, Minnesota, I guarantee there were several, they were victimized by railroads, by banks, by companies that manufactured farm equipment and fertilizer and seed, what they needed to farm. Railroads would charge, the only grain elevators available were owned by the railroads. So if you're a farmer and you bring your corn or your wheat, you store it in this grain elevator at exorbitant prices. And what do you think? Think the railroads are in a hurry to ship this stuff? No. Banks, farming, if you know anything about farming, if you all have a farming background, you know it's a very low profit margin. And it's year to year. It's one of our friends, a farmer here, says we live from drought to drought. He said you're only one drought away from ruination. And this is true. So banks charge high interest, exorbitantly high interest. And what's the collateral? Your farm. So it's a win-win for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then farm equipment companies, there was a monopoly on this, seed, the whole thing. So these farmers got really mad, and they organized this movement that resulted in the Populist Party. And these farmers are beginning to say, look, this division on race doesn't make any sense. We're all poor. We're all in the same boat. And it almost worked. They said, look, city workers are in the same boat we are. They're being exploited. They don't have unions. How do you think they stopped it? They played the race card again.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the end of it. And so it's been going ever since. I'm horrified at the depth of, you said, I grew up in the tail end of Jim Crow. I did. I remember it well, where in the town where I grew up, it's about 10,000 people or so. Blacks couldn't eat in white restaurants. They couldn't stay in white hotels. The neighborhoods are segregated. The cemeteries are segregated. One Southern historian wrote that the white Southerners' idea of heaven at the pearly gates is two turnstiles, one marked white, one marked colored. I remember that. The courthouse in my hometown had 4 toilets: white men, white women, colored men, colored women. And I used to tell my students, this is not the 1860s. We're talking about the 1960s. Yep. when this stopped. And I was talking to one of my friends who's a really good historian. One of my favorite sources, Brian Clardy, teaches at Murray State University. And Brian's a little younger than I am. So he actually was born and reared after the Jim Crow era. But he likens this to 1877. Reconstruction is by this point, the Northern Republicans are getting tired of Reconstruction. They think it's a lot better. They can go down south and make money by exploiting these laborers, no unions down there. So Reconstruction goes away. And so all this progress that was made, slavery is over. 13th Amendment ends the last vestiges of slavery. 14th Amendment makes African Americans citizens. 15th Amendment puts the ballot in the hands of African American males. All this progress this is astonishing from this country. There's this where you had the South, the enslavers, and in the North you had sympathizers of the enslavers. Well, all this changes. So in 1877, here we go. We go into the Jim Crow era, which lasts until the 1960s. And Trump, make no mistake about it, what underlay this whole Trump phenomenon was racism. You remember, make America great again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What he meant was make America white again.
Mm-hmm.
And they heard it and they voted accordingly. Just, I guess, anecdotal. For example, used to when people tell a racist joke, they look around to see who might be hearing, listening.
Mm-hmm.
They don't even look around anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They just do it. The Trump flag flies with Confederate flags. This is just, and I don't know how far it'll go. There's a man running for the United States Senate in Kentucky named Andy Barr. His opponent, by the way, is an African American named Charles Booker. And this guy he's race baiting. This is like Theodore Bilbo, Lester Maddox, George Wallace, these Southern politicians. Kentucky being a border state, I'm not saying it's prejudice free, far from it, but Kentucky politicians historically did not race bait overtly like that. Well, this guy is. He's a sitting U.S. congressman. He's giving a congressional seat to run for the Senate. And this is what's going on. It is still going on. And I wish the heck I knew the answer to this. Education, and that's tremendous. But again, to change, you've got to be willing to change. You've got to be looking to change. And so that's where we are. I'm very, very pessimistic to the point of being cynical about this. But we keep repeating this over and over again. Mark Twain said history doesn't repeat itself, but it sometimes rhymes.
Yeah.
Rhyming pretty loudly now.
But one thing I wonder about, Barry, I wonder if, there came a time when overt racism was no longer socially acceptable.
Right. Sure.
But that doesn't mean racism wasn't acceptable.
Exactly.
It continued to be acceptable.
No,
Segregation has continued. Even right here in Los Angeles, I can just take a drive down Wilshire Boulevard, from one end of Wilshire Boulevard to the other end of Wilshire Boulevard, and I will watch the neighborhoods change.
Mm-hmm.
And you would think that they still had the same kind of racially structured boundaries.
Yeah.
So the redlining, right? You'd think that redlining was still being enforced. It's not being enforced by the state. It's enforced by our social agreements.
Yes, it is.
And no one is ashamed. You can go into a white community. Like, there are some white communities, I would be very cautious to walk down the streets of those communities for fear that I might be stopped by the police asking me, what am I doing here? That has happened in my life. It has happened to me. It has happened to my son.
Yeah.
So what I've been wondering is perhaps we should have just let them fly. Do what they want and then see what the outcome would be. Because I think that what we have tended to say is, oh, things are getting better. It'll happen gradually. But we're hundreds of years into this experiment. And it has not changed. It has gone a little bit underground and then it flares its ugly head right back again.
It does. It does. And that's absolutely true. It's true here. It's true everywhere. I had a colleague who was from Milwaukee, that's the far north, and he lived in an all-white neighborhood. Now, there weren't Jim Crow laws in the north. But up there, it was de facto segregation. Chicago, for example, was tremendously red lines all over the place. And he said that he remembered that this black man came into the neighborhood to mow this guy's yard, and he was like, who is he? What's he doing here? Well, what's that man doing here? Mm-hmm. And that's in the supposedly enlightened North, and the thing about it, you go back to the 1960s with when Wallace runs for president, 1968, George Wallace. a segregationist. You remember he stood in the schoolhouse door at the University of Alabama, segregation now, segregation forever, all that stuff. Well, that and then on television, the media did a tremendous job in showing the horror of this Bull Connors turning fire hose, Edmund Pettus Bridge, all these things that there was just horrible stuff. And so then Nixon comes with this Southern strategy. How do you win these Southerners over? And you simply just it's called a Southern strategy, and you use code words like welfare and all that stuff, and it worked, and it went nationally. Uh, Wallace, as my colleague reminds me, it was in '72 when he ran as Democrat. He carried the state of Wisconsin in the Democratic primary. Now, this is Wisconsin. You think of progressivism, La Follette. You think of unions,
Right.
even there. And he told me, his name was Dave. Dave told me, he said, look, he said, rural Wisconsin is no different than rural Kentucky or rural any other rural state. And you look, that's a state that produced Joe McCarthy. It's a state that has Ron Johnson as a senator today. I mean, it's awful. It's horrifying. All I can say is, and maybe it's because it's my line of work, is education. Now, I will tell you this: there are couples here, black and white couples. 75 years ago, they would have been lynched for that. And I'm sure there are comments, slurs, but they're there. But again, as a historian, all I can do is cite the record, but it's up to the individual to make what they will of that. And unfortunately, right now, this Trump thing is, I don't think Americans know, and his people don't care. We've become a pariah state in the world. Nobody, no Western industrial democracy anywhere, looks upon us with any kind of favor. It's embarrassing. It's horrifying to see this. And but like you said, this was bubbling under the surface. It's been there for years. It didn't suddenly just jump up. But he exploited this to the greatest extent. He exploited it more than Reagan could or Nixon could. I mean, this is the Southern strategy, the 200th power. And all I can say is all I can do is, I guess, my tool is my writing, and I can do that. And I mean, who knows who reads this stuff? You hope somebody does.
Well, but I think that your message, although it's the same message that I would deliver, your message comes across much more powerfully because you are a white man, because you are from the South, because your demographic has typically been silent
Yes.
on these issues. And so, and for that reason, and people can interpret me delivering that message as it being self-interested. But for you to deliver the message, they won't interpret it as being self-interested, although it is. Because we all have as much to lose, regardless of whether you're black or white.
Absolutely do. After the Civil War, the terms carpetbagger and scalawag became in vogue in the South. The carpetbagger was a northerner who moved south. Most of carpetbaggers were missionaries. They were school teachers. They were not exploiters, and that's the truth.
Oh, I didn't know
That's
that.
part of this great Southern myth. Now, a scalawag was worse because a scalawag was a white Southerner who sympathized with the newly freed slaves. Is what I am. I'm a scalawag. I definitely would be. And scalawags, I've always been fascinated by white Southerners for whatever reason, step to a different drummer. And there are a number of them. The Southern Poverty Law Center was founded by a guy named Morris Dees, who was a white Alabamian. And I'll tell you a really funny story. I had relatives in Mississippi in the Delta, that's the heart of Ku Klux country. And my brother and I, we go to see these kinfolks. They say, okay, let's see how long it takes them to use the N word.
Oh my
About 90
God.
seconds.
Oh my
And
God.
So anyway, but they're, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? And that's what they always, and we would just go in the room and laugh. Well, this is what blew me away. She told me, my cousin told me, and by the way, her nickname was Big Sis. That's a great Southern name. Anyway, so Big Sis, we've got an insane newspaper editor here. I said, wow, really? Oh, yeah, he's crazy. I thought, running a newspaper? Yes. And that was Harding Carter Jr., who was calling for integration in the South in the 30s and 40s. He was insane. I thought, what? I didn't, I was, 12 years old. My brother was like, we know what the hell he meant by that, what she meant by that. But that's the way that it's the obsession. It was truly, it was America's South Africa. It was apartheid in America.
Yeah. Oh, well, America practiced apartheid for much longer than South
Absolutely did.
Africa.
And there are books out, and very uncomfortable reading to some people, where Hitler studied the
That's right.
segregation laws in the South to apply to Jews in Germany.
That's right. And when he took those policies back to Germany, they considered some of them too extreme. And they told Hitler, oh no, the people are not going to go for this, not the way they do in America.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and no, they did. There were researchers came over and went to Alabama and these places, and it's just. But as the great frustration is this, when you teach school, and I taught for 24 years, you reach kids sometimes don't even realize you did it. My wife, who taught school for many, many, she's still teaching school actually. Why I don't know, but that's between her and whatever. Uh, I'm been blissfully retired for 13 years. But she said, my wife, now she doesn't overtly express her politics because, and I never did either in class because you're an authority figure. You don't want some kid to write something on a test because you said it. You don't come to this on their own. Many, many years later, she had this young right wing Anne Rand type student, and he came up to her years later and said, you're right. Everything you said was right. And it's like, she didn't say, I told you so. She wanted to, but she said, well, I'm glad you came to this conclusion or whatever. But that's the frustrating part. It's so blatant out there, and not just in my part of the country either, although it's much worse here the farther south you get. I mean, but I think what you all are doing with your publication helps. There's a wonderful publication here in Kentucky called Forward Kentucky, which I write for them as well. Bruce Maples, that's out of Louisville, and and there are others. And what really is fascinating to me is the rise of democratic socialism.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
So,
mean,
Barry, I know what you're talking about rural America. And as a kid, I did. I grew up in Minnesota. I grew up in the Twin Cities, as liberal a place as you could be. Not necessarily always progressive, but the home of Hubert Humphrey
oh,
and
absolutely.
Gene McCarthy and Orville Freeman. But I also spent time on my uncle's farm in northern Minnesota. And in a way, it was like taking a trip to Alabama.
Yeah.
There were no black people there. There were no Native Americans there. And you could tell that they weren't really welcome. That racism ran pretty deep. But here's the concern I have. You're a really bright guy with all this background as a union guy, a newspaper reporter, a professor, living in the heart of the MAGA world. And we're pretty bright. We know a couple things or two. But so do the people running the Democratic Party. There's some smart people there and candidates there. And yet all you hear about now is affordability, $5 a gallon gasoline and how much a loaf of bread costs. And it just seems like that could backfire because the economy can change. And that's not really why Trump is losing people. Still at the heart of his support is just as you say, it's based on racism, and we don't. Maybe there's no way to confront that, but it's somehow, if this American experiment is ever going to succeed, we need to confront the racism at the founding of our country, even the 1619 from the very beginning,
All the way through to today.
right? Or it seems to me that's why we're a little foolish talking about, well, here in California, it's $6 a gallon gasoline, because that can go away.
That's what worries me is the fact that if somehow this war in Iran. And God knows I wish it would, wish it never started. But if it ends and gasoline prices go down $1 and the loaf of bread's a quarter, a gallon of milk is whatever, they're going to go back to him.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think they will. I think a lot of them will anyway, because at the end of the day, it's very simple. They love him because he hates who they hate.
Mm.
And they're going to put up with this. Well, it's kind of like the old fundamentalist religion, persevere. You're poor on earth, but you're going to be rich in heaven.
Mm.
And they buy into that.
That's right.
And that's what scares me.
Me
Now,
too.
you missed the part about this is what I never understood. Right after Trump got elected, these reporters are fanning out and talking to people about why'd you vote for Trump. They never brought up race. They never brought up race. They let them get away with it. I remember Bernie Sanders went to talk to a bunch of coal miners in West Virginia with Chris Hayes, who I like Chris Hayes, great guy.
Yes.
He spent an hour. I watched this thing, and they never once asked him, is racism a component in the way you feel? They never asked that. And they got away with it. And it's still going this way. They were going to these diners, here's this poor guy has lost his job, et cetera, et cetera. But they never asked him, what about racism? They never, and they're still not doing it.
But Barry, Barry, you are an exception.
Yeah.
Because what you're describing is the norm.
It is.
So I love to listen to Naomi Klein and Ezra Klein.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're both brilliant. And Ezra had Naomi Klein on his podcast in March, and they were talking about all of the social failures in this country. And never once in a 1 hour broadcast did they ever bring in the factor of race.
It's true. They don't. And I think that is one of the grossest errors the Fourth Estate makes. And I've written many times about that. Why don't you at least just see what they say? Oh, I'm not a racist. They'll deny that. But at least you've got them saying it. And again, it's just there. I mean, it's not even hidden. It's just there. You just won't look at it. And of course, racism takes on all forms. You get the blatant stuff when they're dropping the N-word and all that stuff. But the rest of it is like you said about northern Minnesota. There are sundown towns all over. There's one about 25 miles from here. Mm. And it's the county is all white. And would you blame an African American for not wanting to move in there? Right. Yeah. Right. And I mean, and of course, there were some factories over there, and they were their union factories, and so they were black people who got jobs. So the counties went in there. It's like they look at them like this, Mm-hmm. And again, these couples that are black and white, now maybe some people say something to them about it, but most of them, they just kind of look at them. Now I'll tell you a real interesting story I had. This is the covert racism. I'm a Civil War historian, and we were at Vicksburg, Mississippi, on the 4th of July a few years ago, which is the anniversary of Grant capturing the city, and went to the park, and we had a hotel there, and in the town had already booked a hotel, and I went to this. I made a mistake and went to the wrong hotel, and I said, "Well, can you tell me where this other hotel is?" Yes, I can tell you, but she's kind of shook her head. And I said, what do you mean? She says, you'll find out when you get there. I said, what are you talking about? She says, you'll find out when you get there. It was a black-owned hotel. And there was this white clerk. I wrote about that. I think from Florida, Kentucky. I'm pretty sure it's been years ago. But that's the stuff you get around here. And what just really, really bothers me are these churchgoers. Oh, I mean, it's just like, they make an atheist. They're horrible. They're horrible with it. And that's not to say, and of course, the civil rights movement came out of the black church, obviously. But these white churches, it's
toxic. I think it's the worst toxin. And
it is.
And Frederick Douglass, I read his autobiography.
Oh, it's terrific.
And he talks about that, some of the worst of the worst in terms of their cruelty of enslavers were always these ones that were really, they were almost worshipped in the church as high deacons and so on. And they were.
This is another thing how Christianity was used. They taught the enslaved the Christian faith. They were very selective in their scripture. For example, serve and obey thy master. That was a big one.
Mm.
And so basically, you think about this. Okay, so you're enslaved and you've been snatched from your home, brought to this place, just totally against your will, and you have no power whatsoever. I mean, again, and I used to tell my students that under slavery, an enslaved person had no rights, none. Under slave codes, slave law, they were chattel, which is legal term for movable property. That's a plow, a pig, a horse, whatever. So here you are. Now, these Southerners say, well, they were obviously happy because they never rebelled. Like hell, they didn't rebel because they knew they'd get killed. Nat Turner was killed, Denmark Vesey, all
And
these.
or mutilated.
Absolutely. Oh,
Having
God,
your
yes.
foot cut
Yes.
off or
Yes. The whole thing. So they weren't stupid. They knew that. So they resist in other ways. They would plant seeds too deep. They would break plows. They would deliberately slow down. And in accounts of slavery I've seen, some just simply ran away for a few days just to take, knowing they would get the hell bit out when they got back or branded or whatever. That was just how powerful this freedom was. Um, and again, what all we can do is just keep pitching. That's all I can say.
So I'd like to pick up on a little thing you went by pretty quickly. I mean, kind of the key here is how do we create more people like you
in my
and
view.
and me who have heads turned on right for racism? And you told a story about having a junior high school friend in the Black Presbyterian Church. I don't know
Right.
how much that played into your views. I have a
Tremendous.
similar story,
Tremendously.
starting when I was about 12. Kid across down the street was the only black kid for miles around. He became my friend. We spent endless hours together. And I think that shaped my view on racism because there were other white kids on the block
Yeah, he didn't
that
play.
didn't do that.
Mhm.
Right.
And I, my parents didn't tell me. I mean, it wasn't like it was organic. It just happened naturally. And that friendship at a young age, that exposure at a young age, well, that's why she's here.
Well, no, you're right. And again, and I used to tell my student, and they were usually get pretty quiet when I would talk about this, about what life was like in Western Kentucky when I was growing up in the 40s and, well, 50s and 60s. And it was just, it was so institutionalized, you thought, this is the way it is. It's the way it's always been, always will be. Uh, we were middle class and we lived in an all white neighborhood. And a black man would come and pick up our trash. He had a mule drawn wagon with car tires, rubber tires on them. And one day he brought his son, who was I was about 12. I had never come in physical contact with a black child until this guy came. And he got off the wagon and we played pitch, and I showed him my brand new Bell telephone toy truck I had, which I loved. And I, at the time I didn't think that much about it when I was 12 years old. But I thought, my God, do you realize this? What this is? It was apartheid. And I went to a white grade school. I never thought about it. And of course, I remember a place it was Brown versus with all deliberate speed.
Ugh.
I guess that depends how you define that.
Mhm.
But when the schools finally desegregated, and now I will say this for the high school where I grew up in, where my wife still teaches, it is the most uh, racially diverse high school in this area, with Hispanics, blacks, whites. And I remember years ago interviewed this man, older man. He's since died. He's the one who told me that. When I said, well, I said, you remember when the schools integrated to Mayfield? They didn't integrate. I said, what do you mean? They desegregated. And that's where he explained. I thought, aha, that light came on. Just like you were talking about enslaved and enslavers.
Mhm.
That light came on, and I'm using that term frequently now.
Yes, I noticed.
Because you learn from that.
Mhm.
And but it's just so, it's like, you'd like to think as each generation goes on, this stuff gets out. And I don't think among young people, I hope not, that there is still some, but I don't think that our son is 33 years old. I don't know what does that make him, a Gen X, Y, Z, or whatever. I don't know what that stuff is. Anyway, he, after he graduated from Murray State University, his parents' alma mater, he told us, he said, I love you all, but he said, I'm not living here. He said, I'm sick and tired of the racism and the sexism, the homophobia. He's gay. I'm getting out of here. And I'm going to the only place in Kentucky where you can go, and that's Louisville. And he did. Oh, God, we miss him every day. He's a good kid. He calls every day, which we appreciate that.
Mm.
And the economic opportunities here, he's in public relations for this big engineering firm. Uh, and that's just what's so sad. Uh, you got to hope it gets better. As my friend Brian says, I fear the worst and hope for the best.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
But
that's true.
so you having a 33-year-old, you have a foot inside of what goes on with that generation.
Yeah.
Does
Yeah.
he ever tell you, I mean, with him being gay, so he has a broader view
Mhm.
about injustice than maybe you would have had.
Right.
But, there's this whole growing manosphere group
Oh,
of
I know it. All
what
this.
is
Well, now this is amazing. This toxic masculinity. In fact, I wrote a piece, I believe, for Forward Kentucky about that. The most decorated American soldier in World War II was a Texan who was 5'5" and weighed 120 pounds, Audie Murphy.
Right.
He is anything but a macho. I mean, little bitty. Dick, you may remember this on the comic books, the Charles Atlas commercials. It was a picture of Charles Atlas. You could send in 50 cents and become a monster guy, and it's like, and I've interviewed probably 24 World War II vets. I never heard of one of them call themselves a war fighter.
Right.
Did you ever hear a guy in Vietnam a war? No, that's just a weird word. And the thing about it is, these soldiers in World War II. Well, my dad was about to play minor league baseball. My father-in-law worked in a store, his family store, and they went out and beat these two highly professional military machines, the Japanese army and the German army, and then came back home. This Hegseth stuff, it is the weirdest thing. This macho stuff. Now, he did serve in combat in Iraq. He did. I guess it was Iraq. But where this comes from, it is sickening. It is absolutely sickening, this toxic masculinity. And it's all these idiots, of course, go back. We used to be called the War Department. It did, but it's been called the Defense Department since. And all this nuttiness about the testosterone. Oh, this is the one that just slays me. I think I wrote about that for your publication. We're going, and can you imagine in World War II, these airborne troops are going to jump into Normandy. Before you go, we got to check your testosterone. You know, Jesus Christ! I mean, give me a break. That's the most idiotic thing. And somehow we were able to win this war without these people being tested for testosterone. It's like, and then you've seen those weird commercials for the testosterone, whatever that stuff is called. It's just asinine. But that's where we are. And
right. So what Hegseth is doing is really dangerous.
Oh, extremely.
He's making the military dangerous for Black people, dangerous for brown people, dangerous for women, dangerous for trans people and gay people. And that's going to have a lasting effect. I mean, a big portion of the Army are Black people.
Sure.
And if I were a 19-year-old Black person, I would think 3 times before signing up. Even if it was my best way out of where I was.
Interesting historical parallel here, in a way. Okay. And I did teach European history for a while. All right. 1930s. Stalin is consolidating power in the Soviet Union. He is sending millions to the Gulag, killing those. So then he decides that the top brass in the Red Army is against him. So he had these show trials. He decapitates the Red Army, all these competent generals. He has them killed or sent to the Gulag. Well, when Hitler invades, he has these toady generals who are just totally screwed up, and they damn near lost the war because of that. And even Zhukov, who's their great commander, he was on Stalin's shit list for a while himself. And you think all these generals they killed, they could have used those guys
Right.
when the Germans came roaring in there.
Right.
This is the insanity of this.
But I have a question, and
Yep.
I'm talking to my history professor now.
All right.
So 1930 Stalin, he was already exhibiting signs of being mentally imbalanced.
Yeah.
But in the 1940s, when Churchill, FDR, and Stalin came together, didn't they sense that, he was a little bit off?
I think they did, but if you study World War II, and I'm not at all demeaning D-Day or the Italian campaign, but the German army was defeated in the Soviet Union.
That's right.
The Soviet people, over 20 million Soviets were killed in World War II. We lost 400,000. I'm not minimizing that at all, but I'm just this is where it was. And even Churchill said that the Soviet army tore the guts out of the Nazi beast. Roosevelt said the same thing because they understood. Now, they had no illusions about what Stalin was. He was a megalomaniac, but damned, he was useful and his army was useful. We couldn't have won the war without him because they just, that's where the Germans were defeated on the ground. And again, I'm not demeaning D-Day at all or the Italian campaign. And the air war, of course, that was so important to bombing. But Stalin was. But it's a funny thing. It's what I think of. We had all kinds of British friends, including one who was an honest to God communist. He joined the party in the 1930s, and to his dying day, loved him. He was such a wonderful man. But he believed Stalin was maligned, that Stalin was really a good guy all along, that all this stuff about Stalin was not true. In his 80s, he sold copies of the Morning Star, the British Communist newspaper. On the other hand, I interviewed years ago a guy who had been a former official of the East German Communist Party, and he basically said, "Yeah, we screwed up. This didn't work." But you find people like that. Now, I'm going to tell you, I think the Democrats are you're wasting your time trying to win over these hardcore Trumpers. They'll die with him. And so, but what I think you need to do is, well, I remember one of my journalism classes in grad school. It's called nexus of mediating factor, which is a fancy word for saying you're not going to change anybody you don't want to be changed. So you go for people you think are open to do this.
Yeah,
because if you're not open to change, you'll be seeing hell before you change your mind. Another problem is, do we like to admit we're wrong? Hell no, we don't like to admit we're wrong. And that's another problem right there. They know in their heart of hearts, as Shakespeare said, to their own self be true. They know they screwed up. They know they're wrong. But what just tickles me is how these Republicans paper that over. They're just going, hell yes, we're racist. Yes, we are. We believe in white supremacy. But oh no, we don't believe in that stuff. We don't believe in that stuff. And they, whatever.
Yeah. So before we got on live here, we had a conversation, and that's essentially what I said. What you're saying with racism at the heart of the MAGA world, we're not going to change their mind by promising $3 a gallon gas.
No,
but there's lots of people in the middle who are kind of amorphous, who are paying attention to the Dodgers, to their kids, and don't have that deep-seated racism in them, and they could be persuaded.
They can be,
but not by telling them, it's an economic issue. It's a moral issue.
It is.
Reach those kind of things.
And of course, they go to church. They preach that morality. I'm proud of my Presbyterian roots. I'm proud of what the Presbyterian Church has done in terms of social justice. We have some outstanding pastors, including a guy in Louisville named Dwayne Lee. He's gay, Presbyterian pastor. I remember years and years ago, the Machinists Union tried to organize a Catholic hospital here, and they resisted. And of course, there again, Catholic social teaching is very strongly pro-union. But they tried to bust this. They did bust this union in the end. But we were out there walking a picket line. I was out there walking a picket line with them, and this bus came up, big bus load, and they were seminary students from Louisville Presbyterian Seminary. I thought, man, this is great. There is also an organization, I'm going to write about them for your publication here, Institute for Christian Socialism. Oh my God, Christian socialism, their heads explode when you say that, these fundamentalists.
But if
But
you study the words
yep,
of Jesus, just read your red letters in the
oh, it
Bible.
was. It is. It is. He was. So anyway, uh, and I ran across the other day. In 1906, the first convention of the American Christian Socialists met in Louisville. And this is another. I'd love to take people out to show them this. In 1911, there was a Christian Socialist rally in Viola, Kentucky, this little town of 200 people in Western Kentucky, my home county. And to this day, I would love to I'd love to take people and show it to them. There's a little cemetery near this place, and there are tombstones, Christian Socialists. That's their epitaph.
Oh, well.
And it's like, wow. I mean, so my question, what the hell happened to them?
Happened, yeah.
Right.
But there is out there, and I'll tell you something else. I interviewed a guy. I may send you that story if you're interested. A guy, DSA member, who is going to be elected to the Kentucky House of Representatives. He ran in a district, and he won the primary, and there's no Republican opposition. It's a very strongly Democratic. He's going to the Kentucky legislature. He's the first avowed socialist to get elected since the 1870s, when there was called the Working Man's Party, which is a socialist party, and there were 5 guys elected to that. So it's out there, and now I mean, it scares the hell out of them. Of course, James Carville went on a rant. It was in Huffington Post, calling him effing stupid. You know, it's like, yeah, that's productive. That's productive.
Well, coming from him, it's not surprising.
It's just God Almighty. But I'm hoping that young people, again, they don't have the Cold War, better dead than red and all that crap that we all remember when we were kids. They don't have that baggage. And I'm telling you what, a lot of people, a lot of my union brothers and sisters, some of them are out, they are socialists. Others don't know they're socialists. What you take the socialist label off and say, do you favor universal health care?
That's
Hell
it.
yes.
That's
Do you
right.
favor strong unions? Hell yes. And all this, bring back the New Deal, make it bigger and better. Yes. That's socialism.
Yeah,
Hell, VA is socialism.
it sure
It-
is.
it-
And
it's-
they're taking care of him.
Exactly right. Oh, absolutely. And so maybe the secret is just don't use the S word. Just
Right.
call it something else. But of course, used to be called liberals. Now they're progressives and all that stuff. And so maybe that's it. But my wife is a lot more optimistic about the future than I am. And that's how we've been together for 47 years. And that's how it works is she kind of, well, we just, everything I write, she edits everything I write, every word of it. And she suggests things. And she's edited all my books. And it works because you need to play off on each other to see like that. But well, look at it is my wife is she's very devoutly religious, devout Presbyterian. But the way I
I'm a
look,
Christian.
so I mean, so the way I look at it is this: we're all climbing the mountain by different paths.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm a deist or something. I don't know what the hell I am, but and I call myself a seat of the pants socialist. I'm not a doctrinaire or anything. And I used to tell my students, when an ideologue comes at you with that gleam in his eye, run like hell because the world doesn't need people like that. But anyway, so I mean, you just and there are more people here. I worked with a guy for years. He's my best friend on the faculty. He's one of us. There's a wonderful. I got to plug this little restaurant real quick, and if I'm running out of time. It's called Cast Iron. It's a restaurant that serves down home Kentucky food with this sort of gourmet flair. And on the door of the restaurant, it says, y'all are welcome. And y'all means everybody. Next to it is a little sticker about that big. And it says that this is an LGBTQ plus friendly place. Hell, I had a sticker like that on my door at work. And so now some of the fundies, as I call them, fundamentalists, they're a little bit offended at that, but I put it on my face. I've got over 2,000 friends on my Facebook page. I've gotten almost 80 hits. Yeah, I'm going to be there. I'm going to be there, and they're wonderful people. They're local. They're local people. So again, it's like the kid who came up to my wife years ago. You never know who you're affecting.
Yeah, that's right.
So you got to keep plugging like you all are doing.
Right.
How nice, Barry. This has been
It's always a
wonderful.
pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Same here. I enjoy this. My wife says I talk too much, and I probably do. And
You got a lot of good stuff to tell.
well, you're very
I
kind.
really
And she says,
appreciate
now don't go into your lecture mode. And
it.
says that all the time too.
So we can't wait for your next article and the next time we get together here on Zoom. Thank you so much for your time, Barry. This was
Thoroughly
really a
enjoyed it.
great
Thoroughly enjoyed
conversation.
Right. So long.
Bye bye.
Thank you for sticking around. If you like the LA Progressive content and the discussions we have here, please consider clicking the subscribe button below and also give us a thumbs up. That helps to grow our audience by feeding the algorithm, which helps to get this content in front of more eyes. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate your support.